It's preparing to go live, so it should just be a few seconds. We are live, Chair.
All right. Well, welcome everybody to
Okay,
the
thank you.
Thurston Regional Planning Council meeting of June 4th, 2021. We will call the meeting to order and do our usual thing of going through and introducing. And may I ask, if you know how to rename yourself on Zoom, if you would go in and name yourself with your affiliation. That would also help other people who are looking at you know who you're representing if they don't have a handy list in front of them like I do. And then while we're in the meeting, if you will, it's really great if you keep your videos on, but your audio muted so that we can all see each other's reactions to things, but we don't have to hear the dogs barking, which actually is kind of fun. But so we'll start off. If I call you out, just say who you're representing or who you are representing from the organization. I'll call out, starting with the City of Lacey. Oh, Malcolm's not checked in yet. So Carolyn.
Hi, Carolyn Cox. I am from the Lacey City Council, but I'm also representing Intercity Transit today.
Excellent. Two hats. A lot of us have multiple hats, don't we?
Yes.
City of Olympia.
Clark Gilman, City of Olympia. Good morning.
And another role that you have.
It's the only, well, also as Secretary of the Regional Planning Council. How about that?
Very good. City of Rainier.
Dennis McVeigh from the great city of Rainier. Good morning, everybody.
Morning. City of Tenino.
Cutter Copeland, City of Tenino. Good morning, everybody.
City of Tumwater.
Debbie Sullivan, City of Tumwater.
I'm representing City of Yelm and beyond. Intercity Transit, we've already heard from Carolyn. Thurston County Commissioner.
Gary Edwards, Thurston County Commissioner. Thank you.
Lacey Fire District 3.
You got me, JW. Thurston County Fire Protection District 3, Lacey. Rick Kelling, good morning.
Welcome, Rick. Lot Clean Water Alliance.
Cynthia Pratt, and I'm also Vice Chair of TRPC.
Very good. Nisqually Tribe.
Hello, Dave Isle, Nisqually Tribal Council.
And David, are you still also Thurston Conservation District?
Yes, I'm still on the board.
Along with Helen, yes.
Yep.
North Thurston Public Schools.
Morning, Gretchen Maliska.
Hi, Gretchen. Olympia School District.
Hi, it's Hillary from the Olympia School Board.
Board of Olympia. I saw you, Zita. Zita's here. Evergreen State College.
Yeah, Scott Morgan, Evergreen State College.
And where are you from this morning, Scott? I don't recognize that stream.
It's out by Staircase, Olympic National Park.
Oh, it's beautiful out there. I can almost feel the mosquitoes biting me from here. Do we have someone from the PUD here today?
Hey, how are you doing? This is Chris Stearns,
Morning, Chris.
Thurston PUD Commissioner, District 3.
Thurston EDC.
Yeah, good morning, Michael Cade.
Morning, Michael. Timberland Library.
Good morning, Cheryl Haywood.
Tumwater School District.
Alan Murray, Tumwater School District, Director of Facilities.
And our other member of Thurston Conservation District.
Helen Wheatley, good morning.
Do we have anyone from the Chehalis tribe? Or anyone from Bucota this morning? Okay, then using the cheat sheet that I have, I may have missed anybody. Did I miss anybody who's here representing?
Doug DeForest, your representative on the Peters.
Hear from you later?
Right.
Okay.
And
anyone else?
Chair, I believe. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Lacey City Council.
Oh, was that Malcolm? There you are. There's a lot of people on this screen.
We have a full house.
Very good. It's like the Brady Bunch got cloned. They don't all work, Mark.
That one worked for me.
Well then, Mark, would you take it from here and introduce staff that are joining us today?
I sure will. We had a lot of people hop on, so when I'm done, I may have missed some folks. From Intercity Transit, we have Ann Freeman Manzanares, Jessica Gould, and Eric Phillips. We have Amy Leneker, our facilitator for our retreat coming up in July. From the county, we have Matt Unzelman. From Olympia, we have Joyce Phillips. And we've got a lot of folks from TRPC today because I told folks to feel free to hop on and hear the mid-year program update. So we've got a full house. We've got Veronica Jarvis, Karen Parkhurst, Bina Tabbitt, Berlina Lucas, Amy Hatch-Winnica, Paul Brewster, Dave Reed, Allison Osterberg, Katrina Van Every, Michael Ambrogi, Aiden Dixon, and I am Mark Daly, the director here. If I have missed anyone, Mary Heather Ames from Tumwater. If I've missed anyone else, please speak up.
Did you mention Kate?
I did not. So Kate Lister, our consultant that you'll be hearing from in a little bit, talking about the Capitol campus work.
Very good. Well, we're all here then. Thank you for that. We'll get on to our action items, which are approval of the agenda first.
Gary Edwards, I'd move to approve.
Cynthia Pratt, I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
You have an agenda. The next would be the consent calendar. And if you've read through your packet, you see there's quite a bit on the consent calendar. If you see any reason to pull something from the consent calendar for further discussion, we can do that. Otherwise, we'd have a motion to approve the consent calendar.
I move to approve the consent calendar. Dennis McVeigh.
Need a second?
Edwards, second.
Any other discussion on that? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Got a lot of business right there in that one moment. I know nobody signed up for public comment prior to the meeting. Do we have anybody, nobody's on the attendee list that I can see? So the rest of you are all part of the meeting. So I would say we have no public comment.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
I have a request. I'd like to take a couple of minutes to discuss an item that's not on the agenda, but was on the last meeting's agenda. And I think it's kind of important to bring up, if that's okay during the public comment period.
We could do that in various places, but since we're all hungering to hear what you have to say, let's just do that right now.
Okay. My concern is with the trail survey responses that we discussed at the last meeting. And I didn't say anything last meeting because I was not quite sure what was bothering me. But I went with the population of Thurston County and added 1% for those people that are from Lewis, Mason, Pierce, whatever, coming into our county using our facilities, which brings our population up to 302,491 people. And all we got were 1,201 responses, and that's what we based our survey on. Well, that's 0.0039%. And I question if that's even statistically relevant, because our survey says 9 out of 10 users are white, 9 out of 10 have higher education, 3 of 5 are women, 71% earned $75,000 or more, and it just didn't sound right. So I took a week and spent it sitting on a bench next to the Yelm Rainier Tenino Trail watching people. I saw white women, black women, males, females, Asians, 2 Sikhs walking a dog, bicyclists, skateboard. So I wonder, with the tens of millions of dollars that we've spent building the trail system, maintaining it, including the 3 bridges to close the gap, if this really is a valid study, or do we need to do something better? Because I can just imagine the scenario if we go somewhere asking for grant money and say, hey, we'd like to have $3 or $4 million to improve our trail system for these rich, highly educated white women. I don't think that's going to fly.
Go
So,
ahead, Mark.
Mr. Chair, you bring up a good point, Dennis. And one of the challenges in getting the feedback for any of our planning efforts is getting that truly representative sample of our population. And I'll let Paul Brewster also speak on this if he'd like. But that survey notes that the survey results that they skew towards our wealthier white population. We have that tendency, and virtually every time we go out to get public feedback, we've got to get better about this. And by that, I don't criticize our processes. I mean, this is a lot of what we've been talking about over the past year in relation to equity discussions, is how do we reach those folks that we are tending to not hear from? And it's an ongoing challenge for all of this work. Paul, is there anything you'd like to say specifically about those results?
I just want to apologize first if I wasn't clear enough in presenting the results, but Dennis pointing out the demographics, it was who took the survey, not specifically what is the composition of trail users in the real world in our community. So the survey was not statistically valid. It was just a community preference survey to get a sense of information from people who regularly use trails to get their feedback. So I would concur with Mark that much work needs to be done to engage trail users across the community and reach those harder to reach populations of trail users to make sure that we're hearing broad representative voices from across our community.
I understand that, Paul, and I'm not trying to cast aspersion. I'm just saying there's got to be better information. And I just wonder if possibly we could work with Evergreen or South Puget Sound Community College and get some student involvement and have observers sitting by the trail, counting people and types of people and gather some information that way, and maybe try and stop a few and just ask them who or what they are and what they do. But I think if we just had a good picture of who is using the trail other than who responded through the net. But it's such an important part of our county, and I think we just need to do everything we can to support it. And thank you for the time.
And Karen Parkhurst had something to add to this as well.
Okay, thank you. I was just wanted to say that I think as we move forward on the trails plan, it would be great to interview Dennis and include his comments so that there is a recognition that there's a difference between who responds to surveys and who we might see on the trail. So let's capture some of that anecdotal information to be able to say, hey, we are applying for a grant, and when we're on the trail, we notice there's a real mix of people, but this is who does surveys. So I think it might be helpful to include your observations in our trail plan.
That's a good idea. Thank you, Dennis, for bringing this up. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Excellent comment, and thank you for your responses, staff. And we will look to improve our surveying ability, especially when it comes to the trail, because I know out in Yelm, we're going to need all the information we can to keep the trail expanding.
Yep. One quick thing I'd like to say on that is one of the things, and Paul talked about this, but we really are trying to get creative and getting more of that feedback. Paul went out, and how many different signs did you put all along the trail system so that users would see the signs and be able to, and they had the little QR code. So right there when they were on the trail, they could take the survey. That certainly helped. And yet we still have, didn't get responses from some of the parts of our population that tend to be harder to reach. And so I guess this is something that we are actively working to improve on. So thank you.
Very good. Okay. Then let us move on to our other business, which starts with Karen and Kate talking about the State Capitol Campus Transportation Demand Management.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone. And I just wanted to mention that this morning I was looking at some of the trade journals and the like. When we're writing reports, we sort of indulge ourselves with everything about that topic. And as I was looking through those international trade journals and the like, what I saw was 2 quotes from Kate Lister. And that's exactly the reason that we asked Kate to be part of our project. She'll talk about herself a little more in her presentation, but our experience is that in 2013, we were looking at telework then, as we have much over the years. And she did the bottom line on telework report for us, which really sort of said, okay, let's look in the future and say that we have a higher percentage of people teleworking than they used to in government. And what would that mean in, money saved by individuals, in traffic accidents and fatalities? So when we knew that we were going to be working on the Capitol Campus project and looking at how could a change in behavior by state government employees impact what we need to do on the I-5 system, on the impacts on our local roads? And we knew that this is really a culture shift. So whenever I think of culture and I think of telework, I'm reminded of the Peter Drucker line that culture eats strategy for breakfast. That often we can put all kinds of great things in place, but we have to really examine the culture and how we make changes to that. And my last quote before I turn this over to Kate is Lieutenant Governor Denny Heck likes to, one of his favorite lines, half of which is stolen from Einstein. And if you're going to steal, you should steal from Einstein. The most powerful force in the universe is compound interest and the status quo. So change can be very difficult. And Kate is helping us explore what's happening now on the Capitol campus and what we can do. So Kate, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Karen. By now I should know to unmute, right? One of my favorites is the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And I think that really relates to where we are in the world right now too. We just have this tremendous opportunity to pivot in a way that we have needed to for a very long time. And I appreciate that all of you are looking into this and involving me in some of those decisions. So Vina, let's go to the next slide. You, Karen already gave me a bit of an introduction, but let me just add some to the topic. I think you should know that while I'm an advocate for remote work, I didn't just start out that way. It's because of the research that I've done over the last 17 years that's thoroughly convinced me that it's just the right thing to do for people, for planet, and for organizational performance. Having said that, I believe that every organization needs to make their own decision about what they're going to do in terms of remote work going forward. I think every manager within the organization, I think every individual within the organization, all of those things need to be taken into account, and we really need to do what's right for each of us. I've written 5 business books, all published by John Wiley & Sons, and contributed to a number of others. One of them, actually the most recent, and just started working on it maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and it actually came out in December of 2019, was the Telework in the 21st Century, which was a publication by the International Labor Organization, a 6-country study of telework, and they asked me to write the US chapter. This is all in terms of credibility building, because some of the things that I say may sound extraordinary, but I want you to know that I've done my homework. Next slide. Our clients and our partners include some of the top names in corporate real estate around the world, in industry, in government. We're working with a number of Fortune 1000 organizations right now, helping them through that transition to how do we get from here to there and what is there. And so it's been exciting times. I feel like I've pushed this rock uphill for the last almost 2 decades, and now it's kind of chasing me down the other side. Next slide. Our work is based on a proprietary database that we have developed over the years that now includes over 6,000 documents. Anything I could put my eyeballs on that has to do with workplace and has some rigor associated with it is captured in this database. And I can do searches on things like telework and productivity and come up with 3,000 documents in productivity and 1,700 in telework, and the merger of the two somewhere probably in the 500 to 600 document range. When we're talking to a C-suite, when we're talking to a esteemed group like you, we need to know that you need to know that we know what we're talking about. And so let's jump into some of that data right now. Next slide. This is from the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, and that's something that's done every year. This one went out in October and November of 2020, so it's got some really great data. It showed that 59% of federal employees were teleworking at the peak of the pandemic, compared to less than 3% who did so every day before the pandemic. Next slide. They had over 1.4 million employees take the survey, or it was fielded to 1.4 million, and it was a 44% response rate. And one of the things that they looked at was, okay, what's the engagement trend been? Engagement had been stuck for a number of years, sort of at the same level. And what they found is that there was a fairly significant jump of 6 to 10% in all measures of engagement across 2020. Next slide. That, by the way, also adds up to, or also matches what Gallup has found over the years, that people, even if people have the opportunity to work remotely and don't use it, engagement goes up. It's just having that sense of control and autonomy. It also showed, the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey also showed an increase in improvement against all measures of employee work experience, feeling of accomplishment, ability to use their talents every day, understanding their goals and those of others. Again, had basically a flat trend over the past several years, but an increase in this past pandemic year. Next slide. In April of last year, so a month really into the pandemic, we and another organization fielded probably one of the first large surveys of how it was working. What were people experiences at home? We collected over 2,500 responses, and we were actually surprised at the resilience. 68% of private sector employees and 73% of government employees said that they felt very successful or extremely successful working from home. And about another 20% said that they were felt moderately successful. Again, this is very early on in the pandemic, so we were still figuring out Zoom. We were still figuring out how to unmute ourselves, how to get on the VPN. We had children at home that were being homeschooled, bandwidth issues, just a lot going on. So we were pretty surprised. We wouldn't have been surprised prior to the pandemic, but this is something that we are working with organizations over a period of 6 months to a year, even longer, to prepare people for, and boom, people had to get this overnight. Next slide. We also surveyed about 1,000 of that 2,500 were managers. And on average, they reported that they were finding the results 70% the same or better across all impact areas. But let's remember that averages can be misleading. Next slide. When we unpacked that, what we found is that over 75% of managers were happy with productivity and performance measures, things like meeting deadlines, achieving goals, the quality of the work, the quality of customer service. But 40% said that they felt there was a negative impact on their team dynamics, their ability to manage teamwork and employee engagement. Fortunately, only about 8% said there was a large negative impact. So it's something worth noticing. And kind of the good news in this is that those are things that can be trained. Those are things that we would have had we had the time to prepare people, they would have been more prepared to do. But there's no doubt that people like being with other people. And so this hybrid model that has evolved and looks like it will be the predominant model going forward, gives people the best of both. Next slide. We asked agreement with the statement, I am very productive working from home. Over 80% agreed or strongly agreed with the statement, and only 10% in government, 14% in the private sector disagreed. So a lot of agreement on that statement. Next slide. And unpacking that a little bit more, we asked about, okay, how about home versus office? These are all government numbers right here. We asked, what percentage of the time do you spend working alone or with others while you're in the office and while you're at home? I think this would be hard for somebody to answer right now, but this was April of last year. It had only been a month and a half since they were together with people in the office. So there was a small difference in productivity in terms of working alone, 15% better at home than in the office. But there was a small difference also in working with others. But what we found is while they could get the job done, while they said they were just as productive working from home, they weren't as satisfied with the experience. So we know from pre-pandemic research that one of the biggest reasons for increased productivity when people are working from home is fewer interruptions. So we asked questions about that too. Next slide. In terms of government responses, we found on average, people said they saved 50 minutes a day due to fewer unwanted interruptions at home. Again, kind of a surprise given when this was and all the cacophony that was going on at the time. So 50 minutes a day, that's pretty significant. And research by Microsoft and others show that the hit to productivity is not just those minutes. It takes 15 to 25 minutes to recover every time somebody is interrupted. Next slide. And here's what that increased productivity would be worth. People say you can't measure productivity, but well, I'm sorry, you can. All of the things that keep us from being productive, wasted emails, interruptions, stress, all of those things take away from our productive time at work. So I'm a former banker. I'm kind of a numbers nut. I like to put things into, I like to quantify things. So this is what that productivity would mean for somebody at a $75,000 a year salary that works out to about $1 a minute, $50 a day, figuring half-time remote work, which is kind of the sweet spot that we have found over the past decade. And again, in survey after survey after survey during this past year, that's what's bubbling up. So what that means is an extra $6.3 million a year for every 1,000 remote workers. Next slide. So the interest in work from home has been driven over the years by the two biggest are increasing productivity and reducing costs. And they have flip-flopped together with attracting and retaining talent. Right now, attracting and retaining talent is the primary driver of offering telework. But saving money is right up there too. And when it's done right, organizations can reduce their physical footprint through telework. But while employees want to work from home, they also want to keep their desk. And over the years, there's been a great deal of resistance to giving that up. What we found in our survey was that people want to work from home badly enough that they're willing to give it up. 67% in government say they would give it up for the opportunity to work from home, give up a private office space or individual office space, and 58% in the private sector. Next slide. So let's shift a little bit and look at who wants to. People have wanted to work from home long before the pandemic, but now they feel empowered to ask for it, and they already are. So these numbers of 76% in the private sector and 85% in government are no surprise. We've been seeing that for years and years and years. But now they have a lot more options, and that's going to have a big impact on attraction and retention of talent. We have a large law firm that we're working with that is already seeing a number of their employees jump to other law firms who have already declared what their policy is going to be going forward. And the firm we're working with has not done that yet. Next slide. Against our better judgment. This is from the Washington State Employee Engagement Survey. It was done in October of 2020. There were 43,000 responses. And it shows similar to what we're seeing across the board, that the majority of people want to work remotely in that 2 to 3 to 4 day a week range. There's a much higher significance of people wanting to do so in the all the time in the Washington State population than we're seeing elsewhere. Typically, we're seeing 20 to 25%. And only 6% say they never want to do it. Next slide. This is some other, I think, interesting research to chew on. This was a survey that we did with Owl Labs with 2,500 respondents in September of last year. And we asked people, if you weren't allowed to work remotely after the pandemic, would you stay with your organization and be less happy? 66% said yes, that's what they would do. 54% said they would stay and not be willing to go the extra mile, and 46% said they would look for another job. Those aren't the kind of people that you really want still working for you in any of those circumstances. I once heard the definition of disengagement is employees that have quit, they just haven't told you. Next slide. The tide has also shifted on organizations. Gartner finds that over 90% of HR leaders say they're going to allow their people to continue to work from home when the pandemic is over. McKinsey has that number at somewhere like 70%, but there's been a significant reduction in the stigma around it, and also significant reduction in fear. Next slide. In July, I had the honor of being selected as one of 3 witnesses to testify before Congress on the expansion of teleworking government after the pandemic. And one of the things that I reported is that the government could save $14 billion a year if it allowed those that were already eligible, they've already deemed eligible to work from home, do so half of the time. There's a written business case. I think there's a link to it here at the end. Next slide. And those numbers are based on a model that we built more than a decade ago. It's been free on our website for all of that time. But in 2016, the U.S. General Accountability Office was charged by Congress to look for ways to quantify the impact of telework. They'd spent a lot of money on it. There'd been a lot of legislation around it, and they wanted to know, hey, what's it doing? And so they looked around for tools and found our calculator, and it was the only tool that they recommended in the report, and they described it as comprehensive and based on solid research. Next slide. And from that tool, we estimate that a typical employer can save about $11 million a year for every half-time remote worker. One of the things that we're working on with TRPC is a business case for remote work in Washington State. And in it will be all of the evidence behind how did we come to a 15% increase in productivity, 25% reduction in real estate, and so on. But these are conservative estimates. These are the ones that the General Accountability called thoroughly researched. Next slide. So we're finding that if there's the silver lining, I think there are a number of silver linings to the pandemic, but one of them is that we're realizing that in the not very long run, it's got to be good for the employer, employee, the environment, and society. That's how people are choosing who they work for, who they buy from, where they live, and there's just no cheaper, more popular, easier way to tick all of those boxes than through remote work. Next slide. Now, I'm not saying it's without its challenges. It's not a panacea. And certainly I have never recommended all remote work. That blend has some complications, but it does sort of satisfy a number of things better than the things more so than it creates challenges. But some of the challenges that organizations are dealing with right now, and they're taking very seriously, is this issue of equity. How do we keep from creating an environment of haves and have-nots, the people that are remote, the people that are not remote, equity across those who can't work remotely. Another thing they're struggling with is this feeling of cultural connection. They feel like that's being pulled apart by people when, at least during the pandemic, who are working full-time remote. They're having difficulty onboarding new employees and are missing kind of that informal learning that takes place in the hallways and the elevators and all of that. They're finding that younger workers are having a bigger problem with this than older workers, which was kind of a surprise at the beginning. But when you think about it, they don't have typically a large enough home that they can dedicate a space to remote work. They may have young children at home. They may be sharing an apartment with somebody. And they don't have that confidence that comes from being in the job for quite a while and knowing all of the players in the organization. Overworking is a huge problem with people from working from home. It always has been. Without all those subtle cues of people coming and going, it's really hard to turn it off at the end of the day. I've got one friend that gets in the car and drives around the block at the end of the day, parks back in front of their house just to give that separation. But these are all things that can be taught and can be trained. We're finding that well-being in terms of stress is huge, 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 huge. It's something that companies are taking very seriously right now. Kind of hard to unpack the extent to which that's a result of remote work and a result of all the things going on in the pandemic. And then equity around career worries, whether if I'm working remotely, am I going to be passed over for raises and for promotions? So with that, I would like to open it up to questions, or I think actually Karen has some questions for me that we can start with.
Thank you. So one of the things I wanted to talk a little bit about, and okay, this is really something that we've had a discussion about at the council before, is the broadband issue. And I believe we actually have an expert who's lurking on this meeting about broadband. And so how do you see, especially around equity, I think many of us were surprised during the pandemic to find out that, wait a minute, I'm like 5 minutes from downtown. How come I don't have better broadband service and I've never tested it? Or let's turn our videos off at 3 o'clock because it gets really busy. So how do we fix that? How are we going to make that work?
The federal highway system changed the country. Made cities more accessible and rural areas more accessible. And in the same way that it was the means of transportation to work for the last several decades, the information highway is going to be that means of not just transportation to work, but shopping and all kinds of other things, learning. It's just something that we absolutely have to invest in. You know, I know some companies got very creative and put repeaters and broadband on buses and parked them in areas where children didn't have access to it. But it's not just about work. It's, you know, it's about learning. It's about that haves and have-nots and equity. It's just something that we have to invest in. And early on in the pandemic, I was on a panel with the Secretary of, what would he have been the Secretary of for the country? the FCC, I guess.
Technology.
Yeah, right. The chief muckety muck of broadband for the US. And he was being asked the same questions and kind of skirting a lot of the answers. But you know, it has just brought this to the forefront. We struggled with it before. There was inequity before, and this has really pushed it in our face.
Yeah, especially in the rural communities. So
and like you said, in cities.
Yeah. I see there's lots of questions in the audience.
Yeah, I want to keep us on track. I'm going to start with the ones that I have listed in the order that they asked, but we're going to try to keep this to about no more than 10 minutes because we're already running afoul of our schedule, and we all want to hear from Mark later. So we'll start with Commissioner Edwards.
Yes, I think this is one of the better presentations that I've heard. And I really do think that if Kate's message can get out to as many policymakers as possible, we're going to make some proper adjustments. I know that the private sector is doing so. And my question for Kate is, you said that a lot of this information came from early on in the pandemic. Is there any intent maybe on your part or your group to kind of redo this whole thing and see if things have changed now that we've got a year or so into it since you did this, it sounds like?
Yeah, great question. It's been interesting. I mean, I guess you shouldn't wonder if you did a statistically valid survey, then it shouldn't be a surprise that other statistically valid surveys say the same thing. But what we have seen over the years, hundreds of surveys, literally, 15,000 respondents, 30,000 respondents. It's all coming down to the same numbers. It's all coming down to the same numbers in terms of who wants to, how often they want to. The experience in terms of productivity. I think over time, there has been an increase in the obstacles, the challenges, particularly around the social interaction. But I think we're all just, wearing a little bit thin on that. And I also question, people want to go back to work because they want to see their colleagues, but it kind of reminds me of that couple that you used to get together with a lot and stopped seeing. And then you say, hey, we should get together with them again. And then you do, and then you on the way home in the car, you say, I remember why we didn't get together with him. But, we may want to go back to the office, but we may be surprised what we find there, particularly in this transition phase where not all your friends are going to be there.
My follow-up would be, are we going to be able to utilize this message you're bringing to us today? Like from my position, okay, I'm one of three on a legislative body, so I want my seatmates to see this. It is so important. Karen, do you know, are we going to be able to get this, or have to have Kate come in, or what?
Well, obviously this is available on Facebook, so we could certainly make sure that your commission has all the information to listen to this presentation. We're finishing up our report. We'll be madly working on that this weekend and in the next few days, so they'll have copies of that. Early on in the pandemic, we had a meeting with your leadership folks in your office, and we talked about resources that were available. So we're here to help and present that. I'm not sure that we have room in this contract for Kate to come to each group, but we can certainly make sure that you get copies of the presentation ways to get back in touch with us to get more information.
Oh, okay. Kate, I just finished with saying, boy, I see a lot of empty parking lots in office space areas. And I think
Yep.
you are spot on. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Commissioner.
We'll go with Debbie, then Cynthia.
Thank you. One of the questions that I have, and I know every job is different, but I'm finding that I spend hours and hours in Zoom meetings, and you're recorded, and you feel like you're stationary on display all the time. And I'm finding that there's physical issues that come with that, of stiff necks or shoulders and those kinds of things. So I think that people who are really in a lot of Zoom meetings need to be able to have those resources for having your body recover, because you're not getting up and moving around like you are when you're in a conference room. When you're in a conference room, it's much more at ease and you can move, where in Zoom, you feel like you're just stuck. So, and I know that there's a lot other things to teleworking, but I think as an elected official, you find that you're always in a Zoom meeting. So I think that if we could find some way of making that better, that would, I think, would be beneficial.
Yeah, it's one of those practices that we need to change. One of the reasons we're doing it is because we haven't adopted new practices around what they call asynchronous communication. You know, if it can be done in a memo, if it can be done in a recorded meeting, we don't have to be face-to-face for everything. We don't have to have our videos on for everything. I'm with you 100% there.
Good question, Debbie. And I'll just say, even though it's nauseating to watch me, I've been doing the sit-stand thing for the last year. And so I'm getting my calisthenics in. I got my little springboard thing I'm standing on. If everybody's doing that, it gets a little chaotic, but it is a tactic I use to prevent those maladies like you suggest. Cynthia?
So I too was going to say something about that, but also besides the just physical sitting in one place, there's the issue of staring at a screen, I think is hard on your eyes as well. And you have to learn to somehow figure out what to do about that. But how did you deal with those? I mean, there are some jobs that while you could do Zoom meetings and teleworking, it cuts off the ability to interact with the public and help them. Not all the public is comfortable on Zoom to ask questions, and they need kind of specifics. And was that ever addressed?
Yes, I've seen, particularly in the public sector, I've seen some evidence that the public is not as happy dealing with people through Zoom. Anecdotally, I've heard a lot of stories. Yeah, I think that's where the hybrid model comes in, that you've got some time and some people that are customer facing, that are in the office, and some people, you know, want to be in the office. So it's about staffing and making those people available, making the human interaction available where it's needed, but also accepting that maybe good enough is good enough in some other cases where, you know, it doesn't have to be 100% in person.
Okay.
Hillary, then Chris.
Thank you, JW. And thanks, Kate. This is a really interesting presentation. I represent one of our school districts. And so although we sort of had to work remotely, we are finding that the majority of our stakeholders are ready to return to in person. But one thing that I wanted to sort of share, or a wonder that I had, was how much of the disaggregated data are you going to be using to help inform where these kinds of recommendations intersect with DEI initiatives, especially at government levels? Because one of the things that we discovered is that many of our families of students of color let us know that those students actually received a little bit of a respite from microaggressions from not being in white dominated spaces. And I wonder if your survey data gave you all any insights into how employees of color and white employees or women who are providing childcare experienced it differently, and whether that gives you an opportunity to sort of do a deep dive on recommendations.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing it leveled the playing field. You know, when everybody's sitting here and we're seeing them all in the same little square, and I can hear Karen's dog whining, you know, and their grandchild walks through. I think it's raised the level of empathy and allowed us to think of our colleagues as whole people. Certainly in terms of the loudest voice in the room, it has equalized that and allowed people to put their hand up if they want to say something when they might not have otherwise. But companies now are really worrying that when we go back and we have hybrid meetings, is that going to then, you know, go back to disenfranchising those who are not in the room? And I mean, it really takes a great deal of intentionality to continue that equity. And you know, we talk to companies about, okay, what did you learn in the pandemic that you want to continue? And we hear repeatedly, we want to continue that diversity and inclusion that people felt during the pandemic, and that level of equality. So with kids, boy, tough work, because you know that socialization that they get when they're in the school, but also, you know, being afraid of being bullied and all that. There's two sides to it.
Chris from the PUD, and then Commissioner Zita.
I like to look at big trends that are going on right now. And certainly unemployment has gone below 6% recently reported for May. Before the pandemic, it was around 4 or lower. The demographic issues that more people are leaving to retire than the number of young people coming into the workforce is definitely affecting the workforce. Will this make part-time positions less appealing, like the 3 part-time positions without benefits that a lot of young people hold these days? Will that be a thing of the past? How will telework accentuate that trend?
I think on the plus side, it gives people more opportunity regardless of where they live, and so can raise the standard of living in rural areas for people that weren't otherwise able to join the full-time workforce, working mothers, military families, the disabled. Yes, I think there's a great opportunity both in terms of inclusion as well as opportunity. But it's going to take some intervention at I think the government level to make that happen and to really force that equality. I think it opens all kinds of opportunities to jobs that people can do without a college education, the whole gig economy. Yes, maybe they will have 3 jobs, but maybe they'll enjoy them more than that one job that they would have had in a fast food restaurant sweeping the floor. So I guess I'm an optimist, and I think there's a lot of positives that can come out of it. Did I answer your question, Chris?
Fairly well. It's obviously a big change we're facing for the whole country. So I see your point.
And it's not just about work. I mean, there's so many trends that are all conspiring that a lot of them things we've been ignoring for many years, and that we're just now having to face up to.
Thank you.
Zita, you want to end our questions for us?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. So Kate, thank you. That was a great presentation, terrific research and important data. You compared the need for a broadband highway to the federal highway system constructed in the last century. And industrial revolutions happen when a new communication system and a new energy system rise up together. The last industrial revolution, the second industrial revolution, was wired communication with electricity from fossil fuels. We have the third industrial revolution happening right now. That's internet systems powered by renewable energy. And telework is an important part of the third industrial revolution that we're in right now. And Thurston Regional Planning Council's broadband planning work is critically important to that. I don't know if Mark wants to say something about that.
Yeah, for just for the interest of time, it's really the county and Jenica Machado who's taken the lead on this in terms of creating. We now have through the broadband office an approved broadband action team for our county. The ports participating, the PUD, TRPC, EDC. Nisqually Indian tribe. I'm probably forgetting people because I'm doing this off the top of my head, but we have got that regional body started to really be looking at what we can do to make sure that we've got broadband access throughout our county.
Karen, did you have a follow-up statement you wanted to make?
Yes, just quickly, I was going to say that it may be time to invite back. We have had a presentation from Department of Commerce about broadband now that the legislative session is over. I think it might be good to invite Russ Elliott, who happens to be on the phone today, back to the table to talk about what the actions at both the state and federal level might mean about broadband access for our community.
Great idea. I know Russ would appreciate the opportunity to come back. So thanks for listening in today, Russ, and we'll put that on our agenda setting meeting to try to get him back to visit with us. And so now, thank you. Oh my gosh, this was a great presentation and great interaction by the members, which is what we need more of. So thank you, everybody. We went a little bit over, but we'll make it up. We're going to go right into, so thank you, Kate and Karen for that presentation. We're going to go right into Mark's mid-year updates, and then we'll take our break and then go on with the rest of our agenda. Mark?
All right. Hopefully everyone's seeing my screen.
Yes.
Okay, great. So we've got a lot of new people on council this year. So just as a reminder, each year in either June or July, I provide an update on how we are doing as your staff in implementing our work program for the year. And this year in particular, it's always a good time for this because it goes right before our retreat. So gives a good sense of a reminder of what are the things that are we're working on right now for this region. I'm not going to go over everything that we do. I'm going to kind of highlight some of those things that are either they're early on, they're newer efforts, or there's some sort of transitional piece to them that we're working on in this coming year. So as I prepared for this, one of the things that struck me, I looked back at last year's mid-year program update, and 2020 was quite a year for many reasons. And that picture on the left, that was actually the photo on the last slide of my mid-year program update last year. We had just worked on finished the lease for our new office space, and they were just gutting it and getting ready to construct our new office. And today I'm sitting in that new office. Yes, it's still a little lonely. We want to see council get back in here at some point in time, but it's ready and waiting for us when it's safe for us all to get back in to this office. And it also struck me and this is a good follow on from the last presentation, the resilience of our staff and all of your staff over the past year is pretty amazing when I look back at what was accomplished over the past year. And with that shift to working remotely and having to figure out how to do outreach and communicate across jurisdictions, et cetera, we just figured out how to make it work. I can't say it enough. I feel so fortunate. You have an excellent staff here at TRPC working for this region, and I'm very lucky to be in the position that I'm in. Over the past year, we finished the climate mitigation plan. You just in the consent calendar accepted the buildable lands report for Thurston County. We completed the regional housing action plan for Lacey, Olympia, and Tumwater. And we supported a complete census complete count committee that saw our highest self-response rate that we've ever seen. All in the midst of trying to learn how to do this work, and while sitting in my case, while sitting in our bedroom, working on a fold-out coffee table and card table thing. So I really want to take a little bit of time just to reflect on how well everyone has adapted to this past year. But looking forward, we're hoping for a little more normalcy. So I'm going to go through some of the key points from our work program that you approved in November and where we're at with some of those efforts. So I-5 planning and environmental linkages. This is a piece we've talked a lot about, but it's also one that continues to be a big part of our work program. So far, we've had over $3 million in state, tribal, and regional funds invested in looking at Mounts Road to Tumwater and what can we do to improve transportation along that corridor and to address the flood risk and environmental impacts of I-5 through the Nisqually River Delta. And so from TRPC's side, this year, we have been working with Washington State Department of Transportation, mostly on the transportation modeling side of things. We're taking what was accomplished in that first phase and now really modeling each one of these pieces individually. So looking at 2030 as one of the out years for our midterm projects. We've got 10 scenarios. It includes everything, because remember, this isn't just I-5, it's really about our system, our transportation system through the county and how can we help it improve, especially that kind of north-south transportation through our region. So we're looking at everything from intersection improvements to using the shoulder along I-5 during peak periods for all traffic. And then when we're looking out to 2045, we're looking at 7 scenarios. These are the much bigger construction related sort of projects, like if we were to widen I-5 and add a lane in each direction, and pretty substantial changes to all the interchanges along this route from Mounts Road through Tumwater. We're still waiting on the final report on hydrology and habitat from United States Geological Survey. Hopefully we will have that soon, because it is a key piece of information, especially for what was just approved by the legislature. So in the session that just wrapped up, we were extremely fortunate to receive $5 million. And I've mentioned this before, but I can't mention it enough. A big thanks to Representative Barkas in particular to help get that $5 million to continue this work. And for this piece, this $5 million, the legislative language was very deliberate in that it said it is for us to look at design and environmental analysis of this Nisqually River stretch. So really looking at what would replacing the bridges need to look like to account for the flood risk and to address the environmental and habitat issues associated with the current bridges, and what it would take to widen I-5, adding a lane in each direction. That money goes to WashDOT, and we've met with them already to talk a little bit about how they're going to use that, and they're planning to hire a contractor to do that $5 million worth of work. So we'll be meeting with them later this summer to help them scope that. This was another piece that was just talked about a little bit in the last presentation. Remind folks about a little over 4 years ago, we started State of Our Transportation System, where we look at some of the key pieces of our transportation infrastructure, and we want to be able to track over time how we're doing on those things. So we've already looked at pavement and bridge condition, fish passage barriers, We talked about sidewalks with you earlier this year, and now we're working on EV charging infrastructure and safety. And you'll be hearing about that in September, I believe, is when we're bringing that back to you. This EV infrastructure is a really important part about, Commissioner Zita just talked about the energy revolution, and that is certainly what we're seeing for transportation in terms of fuel sources. Huge increase in the market share of vehicles that are electric vehicles. And we've all heard the companies that are talking about changing over to electric platforms by 2030. There was legislation this year from our state in regards to that. It is not a matter of if we're changing to alternative fuels, and that may include hydrogen fuel cells as well, but a matter of when and how quickly. And so through this, we looked at the current inventory of charging stations around our area so that we could evaluate the distribution of those and help to inform where there's gaps in that infrastructure. I participate on a few different cooperative automated transportation forums. And one of the things that is getting a lot more discussion recently, it used to be what were the early actions we could do, and people talked about lane striping. Well, now one of the big things that is being emphasized is that EV charging infrastructure, and especially how can you help local gas stations add EV charging capabilities to their stations, because we're going to need that transition over time. So we'll be talking with you more about that in September. The rural mobility strategy, I'm really excited about this piece of work. We're just getting started, but the intent here is to improve our multimodal connections between the rural areas of our county and our urban centers. And so this is considering roadways like Old Highway 99, Rainier Road, 507, et cetera. And right now in this, we're evaluating the existing conditions on these roadways. What kind of traffic volumes, what are the configurations, what constraints do we have? And then we'll be looking at projecting out the future conditions for those, identifying what level of performance and what performance measures are appropriate for evaluating the function of these facilities, and then what strategies could we implement to improve mobility between our rural areas and our more urban core. Early stages on this will continue into 2023. Smart corridors. This is one for folks that have been around for a while. This is something that has started back in 2012. It's a collaborative effort, and actually the funding for this comes from surface transportation block grant funding that council that you approve, that you allocate. And so it's TRPC along with Lacey, Olympia, and Tumwater, Thurston County, Intercity Transit, and Washington Department of Transportation. And what we're doing on this is looking to provide a variety of travel choices and using the technology that's available to manage and to improve the function of that transportation system for all of those users: walking, biking, driving, riding transit, and those trucks that are moving freight. So in phase one of this work, we started by upgrading the signal processors at 83 intersections along the region's main transit corridors. And now we're beginning phases 2 and 3 kind of together to optimize and potentially synchronize signals for general traffic flows. And also a key part of this is implementing transit signal priority, which essentially allows the bus to communicate to the signal. So if the bus is coming up to the signal when it's maybe about to turn yellow, it'll stay green a little longer and let that bus through and improve the function of transit through our region. Rochester Grand Mound Trail feasibility. talked about trails today, and that is a big cornerstone of our region. And so coming out of work that we've done over the past couple of years with the Main Street Rochester study and the Grand Mound Transportation study, this effort builds from that. And we're looking to identify potential trail routes in that area and key connections so that we can connect that Rochester Grand Mound area via trails to the rest of the trail system in the region. To this point, we've did the public participation plan, and we have a survey scheduled for fall of 2021. SCJ Alliance is our consultant who will be working on this, leading the technical analysis and helping us analyze the corridor alternatives, the trail alternatives. And over the next few months, we'll really launch this project and get the web page going and look to do a postcard mailing in the fall to residents. And this is one where we know from past experience working on those plans, we know we're going to need in-person meetings to really get to the community on this. And so that's what we'll be hoping to do over the course of the next year, COVID response permitting. Rural transit improvements. This is another one of those make lemonade out of lemons situations. We weren't able to provide all of the services over this past year, or I should say, we have an agreement with Together that provides some after-school transportation services. Kids weren't going to school; they didn't need to provide those services. We didn't spend the funds, so we looked at ways to improve rural transit with some of those funds that weren't needed just for operations over this past year. So we've worked on a postcard to mail out to all the adjacent landowners along the routes to make sure they A, know that the service exists, B, that it's fare free, and C, that direct them to the website where they can get all the information about rural transit. We created an interactive map that allows users to see the routes, the times, and also help to see connections with some of the other transit providers by keeping all of this updated in Google Transit. Google Transit then helps people understand, all right, how do I connect intercity transit to Twin Transit, to Grays Harbor and Mason and Pierce? We updated the rider guide and translated that into Spanish. And then along the lines of that coordination and being able to make it easier for riders to go from system to system, we've been convening those service providers that I just talked about, the other transit service providers, in addition to intercity transit, obviously, to look for those ways where we can make sure that we're providing adequate coverage, we're not duplicating, and how can we synchronize times to where it works best for the users. Thurston Here to There. This is something that we created in 2013. It's intended to be kind of a one-stop tool for people to understand how their options for getting around in this region. We just received a grant from DOT for this next biennium to update that site and do a good deal of community outreach. We're going to do this work in parallel with our coordinated human services transportation plan. So in particular, we want to make sure that Here to There is working for and is getting out to people with special needs, lesser served parts of our community. That's really kind of our target audience for this. And so all kinds of outreach over this next couple of years to one, improve the Thurston Here to There site, to make sure that folks know that that's a resource out there for them to use. Climate mitigation plan, we've talked a lot about this, but we're transitioning into the implementation phase. We completed this plan with Thurston County, Lacey, Olympia, and Tumwater, and now we have an agreement to aid them in implementation. And for this year, one of the focuses is on getting a agreement in place to solidify our long-term commitments to how we're going to govern this effort, implementation, monitoring, and outreach. We've reformed the steering committee for this that is comprised of the elected officials for each of the four main parties to the plan. And a big part is there's still work to do on really defining some of the specific actions of the plan. And so we'll be doing a deeper dive into residential energy efficiency and carbon sequestration to look at some of the policy options that could be implemented in this region to help along those lines. Public outreach has and will continue to be a part of this effort throughout. And we are looking, we're turning over every rock we can to try and find funding to help with implementation and tracking all the legislation that's ever changing in terms of climate mitigation. Deschutes watershed salmon recovery. You might remember it well, actually, it was part of the consent calendar as well. It allowed us to enter into the next agreement with Recreation and Conservation Office to host the Deschutes watershed, or WIRA 13, as you'll commonly hear, salmon recovery lead entity. And right now, the lead entity is working on its first major update of the salmon recovery strategy for the watershed since 2004. And we've got a consultant that's helping us with the technical work, looking at all the different the streams in the watershed and dividing them by reaches, and then looking at what's the habitat condition, what things are degraded, and what do we need to restore in each of these reaches of the watershed. And then next, we'll use this science to help define specific targets for those reaches. And that will then allow us, much better than we've been able to in the past, to measure our progress towards meeting the salmon recovery goals and to be able to communicate that out to decision makers and the public. And Disaster Recovery Council. Many folks participated in 2019 in the Integrated Emergency Management course in Ocean Shores, where we kind of did a simulation where we tested out a draft of a disaster recovery framework. And TRPC has been continuing to work with Thurston County Emergency Management on this framework and has received some grant funding to continue now working towards establishing the Disaster Recovery Council. And the Disaster Recovery Council, we're looking for an interlocal agreement among key parties in this area. To date, Thurston County Board of County Commissioners, Olympia, Tumwater, and Yelm, we are hearing that they are likely to take action on this interlocal agreement in June, and we're hoping that others will follow. But this really puts into place that Disaster Recovery Council that will be, and that's the body that will be the holder of our framework and kind of the body that implements that framework. And that framework covers how are we going to recover in all kinds of sectors such as economy, housing, education, infrastructure, utilities, all the pieces of what makes our community. How are we going to recover those in the case of a large disaster? That's a lot. But the point of this, it was really just, especially like I said, as we go into the retreat, you see in what we just went over, our core is land use, transportation, environmental planning. And so as we go into that retreat and talk about what we can and should be doing and how can we be supporting COVID recovery, I think it's really important to think in terms of those core strengths, because that's who we are. That's what our staff is. We're land use, transportation environmental planners, and how can we best put that resource to use for this region. So thank you very much. I will stop sharing and take any questions.
I know you're all reluctant to ask questions because you don't want to be that person who makes us go over, but this is a once a year thing. So really, if you have a question that you think everybody would appreciate the answer to, throw up that little blue hand, and we'll go with Debbie and then Hillary, please.
Thank you. So on the Deschutes Watershed Recovery Plan, does that include the hatchery, the fish hatchery, or does it not include that?
Amy Hatch-Winnica is on the line because I actually do not know the answer to that question. I'm hoping that I'm not seeing Amy unmute yet. Oh, there she goes.
Sorry, Mark.
Can you answer that?
I can. The hatchery is obviously something that the tribe has been working really hard on, and it's something that is a conversation that we're having at the salmon recovery level. But it is our community is comprised of a lot of technical folks, state and federal agencies, and community members, nonprofits, and such. And so it's kind of outside the purview of the committee to make the decisions on the hatchery. It's definitely something folks, we have a diverse amount of opinions on the hatchery, but it's at this point that conversation is a co-manager conversation between the tribe and the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Hillary?
Thank you, JW. Thanks, Mark. That was a lot of good information, very quickly presented. I have, but I appreciate the clarity. I have a request and a question. So my request is that that TRPC think about how they might support other council member organizations in the climate mitigation plan implementation. Some of us, Olympia School District, have adopted the climate mitigation plan for our own purposes of our own strategic planning. And I think our staff would really appreciate the support in terms of thinking about where the climate mitigation plan actions really overlap with our body of work. We have some ideas, but I would just put that request in to include those other groups beyond just the cities and the county. And then my question is, and maybe this is a deeper dive conversation for a later time, because it's a question I would ask about all of the presentations that we're getting today, is how is the council and the staff thinking about going beyond surveys? I think Dennis's comment at the beginning of the meeting was very timely, considering we have a lot of equity analysis work that's showing up in our reports now. But what I also see is that we have consultants doing work who are preparing surveys for us. And I think that one of the things that social science research data bears out over and over again is that surveys disproportionately skew white and wealthy. So we can design as many surveys as we want, but the truth is that we're going to have to be willing to engage in really different ways. And so I'm eager to hear going forward non-survey strategies and recognize that those other strategies rely on relationships that need to be cultivated over time. So if we don't think about them a year in advance, then we won't be able to deploy those strategies when we need them. So is there anything you can share about that work?
Yeah, so first, on your first point in terms of supporting the climate mitigation plan implementation, that's exactly why going through some of these things now is important, because that's the kind of thing that we would need to bring up in the retreat. Because as I've mentioned, the work that we're doing under contract with the 3 cities in the county, and the council could direct us as staff to use some of our program funds to support the other entities in the region. And yet that's the kind of decision that you as a whole council really needs to make to direct us to do so. And so I would encourage you, council member, to bring that sort of issue up in the retreat, because then we can program out that time for that support. And in terms of outreach, this is something we've been talking about a lot internally, and it's been especially challenging over this past year when you couldn't be around people, right? And one of the best ways to get past surveys is to get in front of people. And so we, like talking about the Rochester Grand Mound, we've already been talking about, yes, we plan on doing a survey for that, but we know that's not in any way sufficient for reaching that community. We need to get out there. The other thing, though, that we then all need to recognize is then outreach does take more resource when you are having people go out into the field, so to speak, and really elicit that feedback. Incredibly important, and yet then we need to resource it. And that's been one of the challenges, is how do you conduct that more robust public outreach with pretty tight budgets. And so that's something I think we also need to discuss, is not just how do we do the outreach, but how are we going to fund enhanced outreach.
Thanks for the question, Hillary. Chris, you want to bring us home?
Sure. Mine is focused mostly on water and emergency management. My fellow commissioner, Linda Osterman, has been involved with emergency management with the county. But I'd just like to add that we have been trying to create water trees for our larger reservoirs that exist in the county, because right now, people who will be dislocated from water in an emergency, and more than half of our population is in the rural area, unincorporated Thurston County, won't have access to water. And I encourage any city councilor who's paying attention to emergency management to get some seismic valves on their largest reservoirs. It's a really good idea in an earthquake. And we're doing that to our main reservoirs right now in Tanglewild, also in 2 other systems, Meadows and the newest system we just purchased, which is out at Pattison Lake. So it's an important thing to have access to large quantities of water in an emergency, especially dispersed throughout the county. So that's why we're working on water trees, to give access to people who may be dislocated from water in an emergency. And that's all I got. Thank you.
Great point. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. Mark, that was a great roundup of what the TRPC has been doing. I did particularly appreciate that you had footnoted the lead staff member at the bottom of each one of those slides. They truly are the ones who are doing all of this work.
Yes.
So thank you for calling them out and recognizing them. And also, while I'm on that, I just want to thank those who put together and then send out the meeting summary to all of our members, so that we can then use that to report back to our organizations. Very helpful tool.
Great, thank you.
So now, to Debbie Sullivan's point, I want everybody to take the next few minutes to exercise your large muscle groups, get some good air into you, perhaps do the coffee in, coffee out balance, and then we'll start back up again in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, I'm ringing the bell. Everybody come on back in. You know, during our breaks at the real meetings, we'd be getting up and getting coffee or snacks and talking to each other about those little things, sharing viruses back and forth. Whoop. So there was a good thing, silver lining to not meeting in person. But I do look forward to coming back and having those little interactions, those micro connections that make us healthier team. But here we are, and I sure hope that Allison and Katrina and Aiden are ready to go, because we're going to go right into the Martin Way Corridor Study update.
Thanks so much, Chair. Allison Osterberg, a senior planner here at TRPC, and I'm going to be joined today by Katrina Van Every and Aiden Dixon to give you an update on the Martin Way Corridor project, which is one of the projects that Mark didn't cover in his update since we had this presentation today. And let me just bring up my screen. Can you guys all see that?
Yes. Yes.
Great. So the Martin Way corridor, as we are finding in this project, it's a long corridor. There's a lot we're learning, and this presentation is really just going to hit some of the highlights. But there is more information coming out on this that if you want to dive into, you'll have an opportunity to do that. We'll talk a bit about the backgrounds and what we've been learning about current and future conditions on the corridor, some of the key needs that we've identified, and then next steps. So the Martin Way Corridor Study, the purpose of this project is to develop a common vision for the Martin Way area, as well as identify policies and alternatives that will support that vision. It's really looking at the combination of interaction between land use and transportation facilities. And this work is a partnership between Thurston County, Lacey, Olympia, and Intercity Transit, and we're using funding from a DOT through a Federal Surface Transportation Block Grant, as well as matching funds from each of those partners. When we talk about Martin Way, like I mentioned, it's a very long corridor. For the purposes of this current conditions report, we're looking at the area from Pacific Avenue all the way out to Meridian and Diderot. But I want to highlight that the project alternatives we're focusing, the way we scope the project is just from Pacific to Marvin Road, to the intersection with Marvin Road. And in order to make it a little bit easier, we broke the corridor down into smaller segments. So some of our information is broken out by segments. So for about starting last year, we've been looking at current conditions in the corridor. And that has included some surveys of residents and users of the corridors and businesses along the corridor. We did have to modify our outreach approaches quite a bit with COVID conditions. And we're wrapping up that effort now, and we'll be moving into doing through the rest of the year an opportunities and alternatives analysis. What kind of alternatives might we look to see on the corridor? And all that will culminate in an action plan that will come out next year. So right now, sort of looking at across those four partners, Thurston County, Lacey, Olympia, and Intercity Transit all have some sort of vision set for the Martin Way corridor. And that vision is that the corridor become an attractive, mixed use, high density area where people enjoy walking, shopping, working, and living. And often it gets said we want to see it transition from an automobile dominated use to more pedestrian friendly uses with more bicycling and support for high capacity transit. And this really is a vision that our region has had for multiple decades. And what we see on the corridor today is that's happening along there that meet this vision. Overall, Martin Way is still a pretty auto-focused area. It's probably best set up as it was historically for access by automobiles, and that, but it is used by a wide variety of people traveling a wide variety of different ways for different purposes. And it's really a very important area in our region. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Katrina to talk a little bit about some of the current conditions we identified to date.
All right, thanks, Allison. So moving forward, first question, who lives on Martin Way? What we know is we're dealing with a population that's around 9,000 people. If you look at the full extent of the corridor, we have a lot of people who are renters. So it's a majority renter area. We also know that the Martin Way corridor is more diverse than Thurston County, City of Lacey, and City of Olympia as a whole. We also have a good number of people that are cost burdened. And just as a refresher, that means that people are spending more than 30% of their income on housing expenses. And in addition to that, we have quite a few number of those folks that are also severely cost burdened, meaning they spend more than 50% of their income on housing expenses. When we talked to or asked people what they liked most about Martin Way or living on Martin Way, residents, and we heard from businesses and from visitors as well, but really it's all about the access. The easy access it provides to I-5, the easy access it provides to the stores along the corridor, restaurants, the convenience of it all, and just in general, that, again, that ease of access. Next slide. So when we look at who works on Martin Way is a powerhouse when it comes to employment. We have over 1,000 small businesses in the corridor. We have more than 13,000 people who work in the corridor. And when we look at those businesses, about half of them are small businesses. So businesses that have 5 or fewer or less than 5 employees. Not surprising, the top industries along the corridor are healthcare, and that's centered really around the hospital district and Lilly Road. And then we have retail outfits throughout the corridor that cater to the needs of people who live locally, as well as those that come to this area for that shopping convenience and access. We asked the businesses, we did a survey of businesses, and we asked them, what's working well for them. And really it's about parking availability, pedestrian access, and transit access. But there are areas that need improvement, and that includes making those left turns from Martin Way into businesses, traffic conditions generally, congestion being a pretty big concern, and then ability or disability access. Next slide. So, not surprising, land use on Martin Way is pretty diverse. It is a growing area of the community. There are all sorts of things along the corridor, and there are opportunities for development, and there's opportunities for open space. There's opportunities for residential and commercial businesses. Next slide. So when we look at the corridor, harkening back to that vision that Allison talked about, is it is intended, and that vision is supposed to have a lot of residents living on the corridor. And when you look over the span of the last 30 years or so, there's been kind of spurts here and there of development. But it's really been in the last 4 years where we see a lot of new residential dwelling units coming in. And that has really concentrated more on the multifamily side of things rather than resident or single family residential. So a couple of projects that you might have heard about or are familiar with are Merritt Manor, which was completed in 2020, and the Mark Apartments back in 2017. Next slide. So hand in hand with land use comes transportation. And as we mentioned, this is a really important corridor. We see a lot of traffic. We see a lot of people using it in different ways, whether it's by car, walking, on bicycle. It's also a major freight route, and it's a key route for intercity transit. Next slide. So some of the issues that we are looking at are collisions. And when you look at collisions along the corridor, there's a good portion of those collisions that are entering at an angle collisions. And so that's where people are making turns onto Martin Way or off of Martin Way. and there is that conflict and those collisions occur. And there are really three hot spots where we see a lot of them happening. One is down by where Martin Way and Pacific Avenue diverge. We see another cluster around Slater-Kinney Road, and then another one down by Carpenter and Kinwood. Next slide. So I'm going to hand it back off to Allison.
Great. So that's just some of the highlights we identified in current conditions. When we look ahead to Martin Way in the future, what we see is that population along the corridor, consistent with our land use vision and the zoning we have in comprehensive plans, is slated to increase considerably, more than a 50% increase. We're also likely to see a similar increase in employment. So Martin Way is an area we've identified to see a lot of the growth in our region. And I'm hearkening back to a previous meeting when Michael and I came and presented on buildable lands, you'll recall that development along our urban corridors, including Martin Way, is a key piece to our sustainable Thurston region, regional vision as well. What that means is we're likely to continue to see increased multifamily development along the corridor and increased use along the corridor. And what that can mean when you put that all together is if we don't plan smartly, we're likely to see more congestion and more conflicts between these different users. Martin Way is a major freight route. It's a major way that people access I-5. It will become increasingly an area that has a lot of people living on it. And we want to make sure that we're planning in a way that we're accommodating, we're supporting that vision, making sure that it happens on the ground as we'd like to see it happen, but in ways that keep people safe and make people feel safer along the corridor. So as part of those surveys, we asked about top priorities, and among corridor residents, their top priorities were improving safety, improving accessibility for people with disabilities, and increasing places to safely cross Martin Way. One issue we see on Martin Way is that although there are at intersections, there are crosswalks sometimes in mid-block, it's a long spacing in between. And so you do have issues with people crossing, particularly to get to transit stops. And so that can be a major safety issue. When we ask corridor businesses about their top priorities, increasing left turn safety so people can get making left turns from businesses onto Martin Way, but also accessing businesses from Martin Way, traffic conditions, so congestion, but also signal timing, looking at landscaping or ways to beautify Martin Way, looking at lighting and parks and paths, looking at ways to provide better connections to parks and paths. And all these were things that more than 25% of the businesses that we surveyed with the help of the EDC identified as areas of improvement. So moving into our next stage, some of the key needs that we've identified by reviewing current conditions along the corridor is the need to support inclusive growth. We're likely to see a lot of growth on the corridor, and the area is home to a real diverse group of people, but a lot of low-income housing, and we want to make sure that that growth happens in a way that doesn't displace people, that continues to create spaces to address affordable housing needs in our community. We want to look for projects that will improve safety for all users in all modes so that the full suite of folks who use the corridor feel equally welcome and able to use the corridor, whether you're riding transit, walking, biking, however you want to get around. We'll be looking for ways to balance the needs of those different users. I think although we do have a lot of area along the corridor to look at alternatives, we want to make sure, if we improve things multimodal, how is that affecting freight? How is that affecting traffic times? And what are the trade-offs for making some of these decisions? We want to look at ways to increase connectivity along the corridor. Martin Way is a major east-west connector, and there aren't a lot of other options in some cases. And for example, for pedestrians, sometimes we hear anecdotally all the time from intercity transit that people ride some of these lines all the way to the end and back around just because they don't feel safe crossing the street. So what are better ways that we can get people across the corridor so that Martin Way can serve as a connecting area and not a dividing line in our community? We also want to make sure we're improving continuity across the corridor. Martin Way passes through 3 different jurisdictions that all have slightly different standards that they apply along the corridor. And sometimes that can create a little bit of a disjointed feel on the corridor. And we want to make sure that, particularly when we're looking at having consistent rapid transit along the corridor, that the expectations, the way those things are planned are really consistent. And finally, we want to look at ways to build a sense of place for Martin Way. Martin Way is just an area that a lot of people use on a daily basis to get to work, to shop, to get to their homes, to schools, but it's not a place where people particularly like to linger or think about as a place to go in our community just for the enjoyment of it. But I think there are opportunities we can look at to build a better sense of place and to capitalize on the many amenities that the real valuable things that Martin Way has that might be not being highlighted currently. So next steps, as I mentioned, we're sort of wrapping up this background research stage, current conditions. We are going to be kicking off an online open house next week. This will involve a really cool story map that Katrina and other staff, all our partners, have been working to put together. And that's a way for people to go in and really learn about different areas of the corridor, things we're looking at. There's a survey component that dives into what are some different ways that Martin Way could look at in the future that people will be able to respond to. And as part of that online open house, we'll have a virtual public meeting on June 23rd, where members of the public will be invited to come ask questions about the project and interact with the project staff. We'll be shifting into then working with our consultants. We have 2 consultants on board looking at market conditions and also transportation operational conditions. And we'll be doing some of that technical work over the rest of the summer. And then toward the end of the year, we'll be, from what we've learned from those alternatives, identifying a preferred alternative and working on an action plan that'll be coming back to you probably next year for review. So again, that's just a real quick overview of what we have going on Martin Way. We're happy to answer any questions. All 3 of us are here and have different areas of expertise so we could respond to.
Let's start with Clark and Helen.
Thanks, JW. Allison and crew, thank you for the report. And the slide sharing went away. I'll go over here. The first thing I wanted to just clarify that the corridor study includes State Avenue, like down to Capitol Way, something like that. Is it?
It doesn't include down to Capitol Way. It's just where Martin Way starts. So if you think of that Y, where you've got Pacific and State ends, and then Martin Way starts. It's really kind of at that start of Martin Way from that Y area.
Great. I just wanted to clarify because the traffic incident map went all the way down State also. So I was just double checking that. But my comment is I wanted to highlight that the Olympia, as we're finally returning to work plans that have been suspended for crisis mode for a while. We're looking again at the 2 high density nodes on the east side and west side. And one of them is the Martin to Pacific Triangle, basically from the beginning of Martin Way near Boulevard Road up to the city line at Lilly. And we're looking at what sort of the package of incentives and encouragements and regulations that we've used downtown to try to spur multifamily construction. What tweaks to that might apply to try to encourage affordable housing development in that triangle? So I both wanted to say, I'll make sure and flag your report to Kerry Ritlin and his team who are working on the affordable housing side. And then also to give a shout to the 2 Lacey folks who are here, that the triangle really extends onto Slater Kinney with pretty lightly developed, a mix of uses and a lot of open space clear up to the back of South Sound Mall. And we might be able to collaborate in that zone. And that might help with the placemaking. Thank you.
Ellen?
Thank you. Allison, I was really happy to hear some discussion about the stability element of affordable housing, that the population on the Martin Way corridor and a big part of affordability is just helping people to continue to live there. I think that's something that I've heard a lot. And I'm sure Cynthia can talk to this too. The PSRC has been talking about that element quite a bit and sort of bringing it up, recognizing the population that is there when talking about affordable housing. And I agree. I think it's actually, when you look at that area, there's a lot of opportunity to highlight the people who live there and to help make that part of the sense of place. So that part of the project sounds really exciting to me. I just wanted to comment that I've been staring at the health disparity maps quite a bit because there's kind of a rural dimension to a lot of that, but it's really striking how the Martin Way corridor is really key to the, if you look for the areas that have the highest environmental health disparity, it's the Martin Way corridor, and especially that area sort of between Carpenter Road, I guess, sort of going towards Nisqually. And if you dig down into the health disparity maps and look at what the factors are that cause those high numbers, they're almost all socioeconomic, but there is one major element, and that is air pollution. From diesel and just in general. So it seems like maybe that's something that could be brought forward a little more, is that pollution abatement element that goes with it being a high traffic area, and how to address that. And of course, from my perspective, part of that is about the nature of the vehicles, or the shaping of the traffic and so forth, but also it's an opportunity to look at environmental ways to build on the green infrastructure of the area that have been a little bit neglected, planting more trees. It might be helpful to see, when you're doing the open house stuff, to be able to see the green infrastructure that's around the streams, the open area spaces, the trees, things like that, just to get a sense of what's there to build on when that sense of place is being created. I think that would be really nice. So that's my comment. Thanks.
Doug?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question deals with a couple of things. Number one is, what is the zoning along the length of Martin Way, and what do the comp plans call for? Frankly, I find myself more of a shopper at Winco than I ever thought I'd be, and that means I'm driving out that road more frequently than I ever thought it was. And if you take the area from essentially Carpenter Way on out till near the Hawks Prairie area, it's a pile of junk, to put it bluntly. There's no sidewalks, no transportation, a mixture of odd facilities. I've noted that there's several businesses out of there recently that have not only gone out of business, but the buildings have been torn down. Those are two recent developments. It's just, to me, it's what is the plan for doing anything for it from a comprehensive point of view and from a zoning point of view?
So yeah, great points. I think that everyone's brought up so far. That is part of what we're looking at as part of this study. All of the jurisdictions have, for the most part, most of Martin Way is zoned with these mixed use, high density corridor zonings. They're called something slightly different in Olympia versus in Lacey and the Lacey UGA. Those have been on the books for a long time. So I think what we see on Martin Way, and this is something we've been seeing in other projects as well, and as part of the market study that's being done, there were some interviews done with developers in the area. The regulations are there. They permit this type of development, but we have not historically been seeing that type of mixed use, high density, corridor type development, except for some examples that we're seeing out in the farthest eastern section of the corridor. So I think part of the purpose of this, what the jurisdictions are really interested in seeing is what would it take as far as infrastructure investments, different policies, incentives, partnerships, what would it take to see the type of development that's envisioned in those comprehensive plan and in the zoning that's set for those areas and that future land use? What would it take to do that? Because it's not just happening through market conditions on its own.
There we go. So Robin Vasquez has joined us in the meeting. I believe she's on the Lacey Planning Commission. Has a question.
Yeah, hello. I'm actually here. I work for the state of Washington, and I've been helping a little bit with Kate and Karen's data gathered from the state of Washington, but I wanted to ask about the Martin Way corridor effort. I wonder if things like traffic calming are a part of what you're considering or what you're trying to build into your planning process, because I think if you're trying to reduce the volume of traffic as we put more and more residential units in the corridor, making it safe for people to walk and bike is going to be really important. I can say as a sometimes bike commuter, I've gone up and down Martin Way, and it's a little intimidating. You know, there is a bike lane most of the way, but you also got buses and traffic and big trucks driving right next to you, and there's no barrier beyond the painted line. So I think traffic barriers to protect the bike lane will make it more likely that people will choose to bike or take other modes of transportation besides a car.
Yeah, exactly. Traffic, ways to balance those different users are definitely things that we're looking at. We have pretty high speeds along most of the corridor, and you're exactly right. There are bike lanes the whole way along Martin Way, but every time I'm out there, I mean, I'm pretty much the only person I see in the bike lane. Most people I see, there are people biking on Martin Way. They're typically on the sidewalks, and you can't blame them because it feels really, really unsafe, even though you have a bike lane. So looking at shared use paths, separated protected bike lanes, ways of doing traffic calming. But at the same time, what we really hear from people and from businesses is that car access is very important to them. It's really that's the way development along Martin Way has happened, the way it's been constructed. It favors car access. And, you know, so we're going to want to balance those expectations and think about what's really feasible and what serves that mix of users well on the corridor.
Thank you.
Rick.
Hey, thanks for taking my question. And you don't have to answer it now. It can be answered in the meeting follow-up notes. But just in an observation from 3 sessions here as a newer member, it seems to me there are a number of opportunities for public comment and input throughout a number of projects that are going on with the council, but I haven't been able to find a web link on the TRPC site where it has all of those consolidated or a schedule, so we can plan for these in our different organizations as we put out newsletters and such. Is there something of the sort, or do I need to go to multiple spots on the website? Thank you.
That's a broader question. I might let Mark respond to. What we will, for the Martin Way at least, we will have that information. We're not quite ready to post everything, but we'll have a pretty big push next week with the information on our public outreach stuff.
But I will say, Councilmember Kelly, and I think you have a really good idea. We've got our calendar that we have on our webpage, and I think we have an opportunity to use that to be that kind of place where you can go to one area and see those opportunities. So I'm going to talk with our folks about that. I think that's, thank you for that. That's a good question.
Okay, wow. We have had, our brains are all very full. We've run a little bit long, and so Vina has graciously bumped her presentation to another meeting later on. And so we're going to go to outside committee reports. Doug, do you have something for us, or Cynthia?
Yeah, a couple of things. Number one is at the last council meeting up north, they discussed a transportation study that they did. I thought Dennis McVeigh's comments early in the meeting about sample size were really interesting. They did they're working on a transportation future study. They had a sample size of 1,971 responses, and they spent a lot of time trying to justify why that was really a decent answer to the question. They also said that, well, they were going to augment that with 50 individual ones. Well, considering the numbers of people up there, there were a number of members of the council who had questions as sampling the size. And I frankly am a little disappointed in the results. They did mostly with how to make Sound Transit a little more pleasant and all the rest of that sort of thing, rather than directing a lot of effort on issues like autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, and that sort of thing. So, well, there'll be more on that. The other thing they've been talking about is financial studies and assuring they've got adequate financing and so on. None of that I'll bore you with one exception, and that is that their near-term financing plans are now being based on user charges as opposed to gas tax funds. I don't know why, but that came up during the presentations. I'll be going up again virtually on June the 10th, and we're going to be hearing from the legislatures about what happened in transportation from the legislative point of view. So it'll be an interesting meeting. And that's my report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Doug. Cynthia?
So the Growth Management Policy Board met May 27th, and we covered a number of issues, including the legislative update. I only mentioned that because they really concentrated on bills that dealt about housing. But we also had a discussion on the regional economic strategy and economic development work plan, which they do every 5 years. And they really concentrated on 3 issues: equity, health, and childcare, which, as you know, Michael always brings up as a really important element. And then they also talked about challenges, which is job distribution, broadband, as we've talked about, housing and homelessness. And then on the regional housing strategy, our tools and actions, there were a number of things. It was a very big presentation, but for their implementation, they want to do housing first, walkable neighborhoods, condo/mixed housing. And it was brought up that if we could build with less money, is how to pass on the benefits of doing that onto renters and potential buyers. And that was a discussion because, as many of you know, building materials are increasing significantly. So it does impact how you build different kinds of commercial and residential buildings, but trying to come up with ways to make it affordable for low income was part of the discussion of these housing issues. So that's my report.
Very good. Thank you, Cynthia and Doug, for taking on this extra responsibility and reporting back to the members. Appreciate that. And now an encore performance by Mark Daly.
Just a few things. Want to make sure to remind folks to put on your calendars our retreat dates, the mornings of July 2nd and July 26th. That will be our retreat. We're going to be doing it remotely. And also a reminder to folks that are on the planning committee, we've got a meeting right after this with our facilitator. So please stick around for that. We are expecting, we've got our annual audit, our exit conference is coming up on June 10th at 3:30 p.m. So all council members, any council members are invited to that. We are, I hate to even say this out loud because it's not a done deal yet, but we're anticipating another finding free audit. That's me knocking on wood. So let us know if you'd like to attend that. And we're looking for officers in particular to join us on that audit exit conference. And then also, I just wanted to let folks know, thank you, Michael Cade, for allowing me the opportunity to join the board of the Center for Business and Innovation. Had the first meeting this week, just continuing the efforts to kind of strengthen the connection between our work in the business community. And I think this is going to be a really good opportunity to learn a lot more about what it takes to get a business going and keep it thriving in our region. So I'm really looking forward to being on that board. That's all. Thank you.
Wow, very good. We've caught up with ourselves and we've gotten to a very important part of the meeting, which is where all of our members get to check in and share something awesome that's happening in their own organization or their jurisdiction. So sort of a jump ball. Who would like to go first and brag on their neck of the woods? Okay, I will. Go ahead first. Thank you very much for, I have notes. So first off, I think public service announcement, you all need to know that our very favorite Billy Frank Jr. Nisqually National Wildlife Refuge will be closed to all visitors June 7th through the 11th for some major structural upgrades that they're doing. So sadly, we won't be able to walk down there, but I just wanted you to save you the trip in case you were thinking about it. Also, Washington State Department of Transportation has put on a virtual open house for the 510 bypass loop, which you know is helping people find their way to Yelm. And they're looking for public comment on that. You go to their website and you can find that easily. Little personal note, the Nisqually Land Trust has their annual meeting event this Saturday at 6 p.m. You could register to join us for that. And I'll tell you why you'd want to. We have some really incredible speakers for each having about 4 or 5 minutes to say the great work of the Nisqually Land Trust in our region, including new Nisqually Tribal Chair Willie Frank and Tribal Board Member Hanford McLeod. We'll also, and that'll be a conversation with the new Director Jeanette Dorner. We'll also have brief comments from Lieutenant Governor Heck and 2nd District Representative J.T. Wilcox and how they got Billy Frank's statue at the Washington Capitol. So really cool things to check in on. And then lastly, if you're looking for something to do because the refuge is closed, come on down to Yelm because we got our splash pad open and I have never seen more families having more fun than in Yelm City Park, which is the result of decades, literally decades of planning and funding and hard work by our teams to make that public amenity come true. So come on out and visit. There we go. Anybody else?
I'll go from Lacey Fire District 3.
Oh, go ahead, Rick, and then Debbie.
I'm sorry, Debbie. So I know that our district doesn't cover the entire county, but it covers a good portion. As the COVID-19 restrictions are being relaxed, the district plans to reinitiate some of its education and service programs. So we've got a separate education page on our website, and a program that is coming up that's actually new is called Senior Safe at Home program. It should be rolling out in the next month or two. And it's a volunteer program that is designed for members of the district to come and do a safety assessment of your home and provide residents with some feedback on how they can improve safety in their houses. That's all I have. Thank you.
That's a great program. Didn't you guys get a new fire truck too, Rick?
Did. We got a new ladder truck and it's in the bay. Should be up and running in a couple months.
Fantastic. I hope it doesn't have to come to Yelm anytime soon. How about Debbie, then Clark, then Chris?
Great. Well, thank you. I just wanted to let everyone know that today is Heritage Distribution Center, or Distilling Center is grand opening is today from 12 to 1. This is super exciting, and hopefully this will start the whole thing for our Brewing and Distilling Center. South Puget Sound Community College is going to have a campus there. So from 12 to 6 today, at 2:30 is the bagpipes and blessing ceremony. At 3 o'clock is ribbon cutting. So everyone come and attend. And I think parking is probably going to be somewhat difficult. So if you can use the city bus to get there, it's Route 13. That would be awesome if you could do that. Also, the city is working with Olympia, and I'm probably grabbing Clark's thunder here on the regionalization planning committee that's being started. So we have selected our members that will represent Tumwater, and we'll be working with the city of Olympia to see if this is a feasible option. And this is our year of the 3 alternative years between Lacey, Tumwater, and I think it's Yelm for the community development block grants, CDBGs. So we have determined who those recipients are going to be and moving forward with that. And that's all I have at this time.
Thanks, Debbie. The third partner in the CDBG block grant is all of the South County cities, as we work together with Thurston County on that. Clark?
Right. Yeah, and so first, I'm glad to share the thunder with Debbie. It's a regional fire authority that we're exploring, and I'm pretty excited about that. So it's no surprise to anybody that Olympia, along with everybody else, has been spending a lot of time on social justice, environmental justice kinds of conversations. And so I was going to bring a thought, and then it dovetails so beautifully with Mark's report, with Helen's comment, Hillary's question across the day today. It's the tension of how we align the aspirational goals for equity and environmental justice with the growth management mandates for our bread and butter work, right? And the conversations I've been having recently have been inspired by the State HEAL Act that recently passed, and the statewide environmental justice risk factors maps that Helen referred to. That it's the idea that you would have equity and justice screens that would sit above the comp plan development questions, that your first screens would be about, does this heal the earth? Does this bring us to greater equity? And I'm just fascinated that's a possible approach for our new commissions we're standing up to have some influence in decision making, and a different lens for us to use as the regional planning authority to think beyond the narrow sort of real estate development and traffic, and try to figure out a way to make more prominent the diversity and equity, rather than having it be a comment on the transportation or the construction, to flip it around and have transportation and construction work serve our diversity and equity goals. So anyhow, it's just a thought. I was super excited by all of the conversation today. This was my favorite TRPC meeting ever. Thanks.
Wow, that's a pretty high bar. Chris?
Thank you. I just wanted to add that we just finished up a month of doing a survey for doing broadband service in the county. We've been principally focused on the school districts that are principally serving rural people. But the idea is to get some symmetricalness, upload, download speeds being the same, being much higher, possibly 150 megabits to 300, maybe more. And we're focused on that and also finding out what people are willing to pay for it, because obviously it would entail an assessment. Also, LUDs might be involved to get the actual service to the customer. So those are the two ways we tend to finance it as far as what the future holds. Thank you.
Great. Let's go with Zita, then Cheryl.
So thanks for a great meeting. I just want to report that Earth Homes LLC has finished their construction of about 60 microhomes in the Ports Marine Terminal warehouse and delivered them to mitigation sites in Olympia. That was run by Aaron Sauerhoff, a smart young Evergreen graduate, and his amazing crew of volunteers, including many hardworking neighbors without houses. I hope they will be able to continue that project on other port facilities. Also, we're moving forward with Tumwater and the Regional Housing Council on the possibility of turning the Oyo Hotel into low-income and senior disabled housing by getting an FAA waiver. So I hope that's going to work out too. Big change for the port.
Thank you. Cheryl?
Great meeting. In partnership with the City of Olympia, this past Tuesday, June 1, we opened the 28th library within the Timberland Regional Library System at Capitol Mall. So I invite you all to go. The city was very generous in helping us out. It's a 2-year lease. It's a demonstration library, public library, of course. And as Mike Reed says, it's part of the city's post-pandemic economic recovery plan, focusing on equity and inclusion. And so most people have been asking us about whether they can pick up holds there. And yes, you can pick up holds there. Yes, you can access the internet. Yes, you can pick up bestsellers in a variety of formats. I invite you to check it out. The second is June 1 to August 31, summer library program, incredibly inclusive, all ages, and you can sign up at your local library or online. Thanks.
Great, and thank you to Yelm Timberland Library Branch for setting up the cool story trail through Cochrane Memorial Park. Little signboards that you walk along with your family and you read the story as you go. Very cool. Hey, this was a great meeting. Thank you to staff for putting it all together. Thanks for the participation from all of our members, because what we do together, we do better. I just made that up. It sounded pretty good, so I thought I'd share that. But we'll see you all soon. And those of you who are going to be part of the next meeting, Mark, do we just stay on?
No, why don't, since there's a few minutes in between, why don't we everyone take a little break, and we'll see you at 11. Oh, Vina's on, so let me make sure she doesn't disagree.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. But stay on this Zoom. Just take a break.
Okay, and back at 11. All right, thanks everybody. Have a great weekend.